starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon. Today is Wednesday, June 24th. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the Maryland Community Practice for Supporting Families webinar series. This is webinar number 5 on employment. This session is being facilitated by Mary Ann Kane-Bresci, Director of Family Supports for DDA, with her special guest, Kathleen Walker, DDA's Acting Statewide Career and Employment Services Coordinator, and also Staci Jones, Acting Director of Quality Enhancement. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There is one option for listening to the webinar, and that's by computer. There are handouts for this webinar. We have 4 new ones that are loaded in the platform to your right, and then we are also going to be emailing the entire set of handouts. We are recording the webinar, and if we have time at the end, we'll be taking questions directly related to the webinar. But if you have a question regarding services and supports, please contact your local regional office. If you have questions related to Appendix K, please submit them to dda.toolkitinfo@maryland.gov. Otherwise, if you're interested in sharing your employment stories, we'd love to hear from you. Please contact Mary Ann Kane-Bresci directly at mary.kane-bresci@maryland.gov or me, Donna Will, at maryland.gov. So now I'd like to introduce Mary Ann Kane-Bresci.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Maryland Community Practice for Supporting Families, I'd like to welcome you and our special guest, Kathleen Walker, Acting Statewide Career and Employment Service Coordinator for DDA, and Staci Jones, the Acting Director of Quality Enhancement for DDA, to our webinar on employment. I want to thank Kathleen and Staci for sharing your time, expertise, and being with us here today. Many of you already know my name is Mary Ann Kane-Bresci. My husband and I are the parents of 4 adult children. Maggie, who is our youngest and is beautiful, has multiple disabilities and is my reason for having entered the field. As such, I've worked in the disability field for over 20 years now in a variety of capacities, but now I'm fortunate to be here as the Director of Family Supports at DDA. Throughout this series for supporting families, our goal is to bring individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities, their families, and others together to connect and share important information and ideas in an effort. Originally, it was in an effort to support one another as we found our way through the pandemic. And while that's still true, we really are looking beyond that as well. So to this end, over the next several months, we will continue to discuss and address a variety of topics and concerns individuals and families have faced and are facing related to COVID-19 and in life as they experience. We'll do this with our invited guests and subject matter experts. And of course, we do all of this through the lens of charting the life course framework. Oops, hold on just one second. No, let me try. There we go. Sorry for that little glitch there. So for those of you who aren't familiar with charting the life course framework, it is a set of universal principles and tools. Its fundamental principle states that all people have the right to live, love, learn, work, and play, and pursue their aspirations in the community. And as a result, in order to do this, we do this by supporting people through integrated supports and services. Charting the Life course was developed by the University of Missouri, Kansas City, out of their Institute for Human Development Family-to-Family program. It was developed to help people with developmental disabilities and families create a vision for a good life, think about what they need to know and do, navigate and or develop supports and resources, and ultimately to discover what it is going to take to live the lives of their choosing and ultimately to do it. In addition, as we can apply these principles to an individual's life and to a family's life, these principles inform and guide the work of the Maryland Community of Practice for Supporting Families, as well as that of DDA, as we work to create regulation, policies, and practices to better support people with developmental disabilities and their families across the lifespan. Today, we're going to talk about employment, and we'll be utilizing many of these tools. But to do that, at this point, again, I'm going to hand it over to our guest. And once again, I hope you'll welcome Kathleen Walker, again, who is our acting statewide career and employment service coordinator, and Staci Jones, our acting director of quality enhancement. And they are going to take the discussion and move it forward. So welcome, Kathleen and Staci.
Thanks, Marianne. Hi. So I just want to bring it back that thank you so much today for joining me and my colleagues. Here at the Developmental Disability Administration, we believe in the why, which is the universal principle that all people have the right to live, love, learn, work, and pursue their aspirations in their community. Through community mapping and person-centered planning, by utilizing this principle, we support people to find their unique vision of a good life. Next slide, please. So when we talk about a vision for the good life, we tie the individualistic goals held by a person and their relationships that make them successful. This especially includes the relationship between the individual and the family. By focusing on the universal principle, we support these visions set aside by family members and the person. So as you see on the slide, the individual will achieve this self-determination, interdependence, productivity, integration, and inclusion for all facets of life, while the families will be supported in a way that maximizes their capacities, strengths, and unique abilities to best nurture, love, and support all individual needs that the members have to achieve their goals. Next slide, please. So, when a person identifies their vision for a good life, we utilize the framework tools to support their successful outcomes. The trajectory, as shown on the slide, and different life stages a person goes through throughout their time cultivate a person's vision of their good life in an upwards motion. The trajectory is not stagnant, but changes throughout the person's life stages. Based on the person's experiences, resources, relationships, and supports. By utilizing the trajectory, a person can project their vision and identify opportunities for growth, as well as strengths already available to the person. Utilizing the trajectory throughout the life stages is especially beneficial to map and support inclusion and employment. So I'm going to ask Staci a few questions, and she's going to be able to utilize the Charting the Life Course Framework tools to help us see how we can identify this vision. So Staci, why is it so important to have a strong vision around employment and community life?
Thanks, Kathleen. And next slide, please, Marianne. First, let me talk through what you see on this slide. So Kathleen, you really outlined on the individual level, what might someone's trajectory look like, or how might we use that tool? But the trajectory that you see on the screen right now is one that we developed that focuses specifically on DDA. So we looked internally, and what is our trajectory around employment first? And I'm just using this as an example that we as an agency had a vision and still have a vision and have things that we want to see our system emulate. Things like employment first for people with disabilities, community membership, person-centered, a really person-centered system that's flexible, that has a lot of capacity, and we could go on and list all of the things that we want to see in our system. But equally important, we really purposefully identify, what do we want to see less of? If we're doing the right thing, we should see less unemployment for people in our system. We should see less isolation, less poverty, less segregation, less lack of choice, no longer having so low expectations of people in services. And so I think it's important to acknowledge, and I'm going to walk through, I'm going to take it back to the individual level around employment, but it's important to acknowledge that people with disabilities historically have not had equal access and haven't been supported in the same ways to truly be equal participating members of their communities. And that certainly includes employment and career options. So from that perspective, from a kind of a general perspective, it's important to be very intentional about a personal vision. And so now not just thinking about DDA as a system, but going back to thinking about people. So that means being intentional about working with people and families to identify, what do you want your future to look like? What does that include? Having a job, making money, having relationships, quality of life, wanting to live in your own home one day, any of those things people may have. And again, it's an important element to remember. It's possible that many of these things that we call a vision for a good life may have just been implied from an early age for most of us without disabilities, where we may not have woken up one day and said, I'm including in my vision for my good life these things. It's sort of implied for the general population that one day I'm going to grow up and I'm going to get a job, I'm going to move away from my parents' home, I'm going to have relationships. It may not be implied, or historically has not been implied in the same way for a person with a disability, and specifically people with more significant support needs. So that's why it's so critical to have this intentional vision of what things maybe we want to see in our lives. So we know, again, when there isn't a vision, we don't intentionally set out to create this vision, that we might see more of these things that are unintended consequences. So this could be a lifetime of either being unemployed, underemployed. There may be more social isolation where there isn't an opportunity to socialize in the same way with people without disabilities. Could be institutionalization. It could be that maybe you live a life of poverty because you don't work and there isn't an opportunity to accumulate wealth or to have money to make choices. And finally, just the final point on why it's important is, again, one of the biggest unintended consequences of not having an intentional vision is that a person, disability or not, starts to really develop low expectations for themselves. And I think that is mirrored by people around you. If I don't expect myself to work and I don't expect anything in particular, that's going to be the message that gets sent out to people around me, and people around me are going to treat me as if they have low expectations for me. So while a vision that any one of us might have for the future we may never get to those things, it helps create expectations for people around us.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Higher expectations for yourself then demands higher expectations for those around you. So what are the basics to keep in mind when supporting a transitional youth around creating a vision for employment and community life?
Well, next slide, please, Marianne. I think a great place to start is with basics. You know, we could do a whole webinar series, and we have done this, around the mechanics of seeking employment. But what I want to do is really get back to the basics. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is really robust person-centered planning. That's really what this is. And there are multiple tools that you can use when doing person-centered planning to help build that solid foundation for whatever it is you want in your life. But right now, we're specifically talking about work. So again, it's critical to really look at how each time period in a person's lifespan is really going to drive us into the direction of that intentional vision for a good life. Okay, so for instance, if I think back to when I was 13 and the vision that I had for my good life, I'm just going to be honest, that means I would probably have 6 horses and 10 kids, and I'd be living in California right now. So that's, I think, a critical piece to remember, is that at any point, based on new information, new experiences that we have, new relationships that we build, we start shifting our good life vision a little bit. The details might change a little bit. I don't really want to have a horse anymore, and 2 kids was enough, and I don't want to move to California. So, but some of the bigger principles might stay the same. Like, I still need a job. I still want a job. I want to make money. I want to have friends and family. It's all the other details that might kind of shift from time to time. So there was no debate. I knew I wanted to work and find a career so I could have money to move out of my parents' home to buy the things I need to survive. Next slide. And because we're specifically focusing on employment here today and supporting transitioning youth around employment outcomes, one of the things I think that's most critical in using this specific tool, so we're talking about using this as a planning tool with people, with youth, and with families, is that whether it's at the age of 5 or 13 or 21 or 65, if you treat a person like they are a person that can work, if they want to work, then the rest of their lives will be oriented in that manner. And I think that's worth repeating, so I'm going to repeat it again. If we treat a person at whatever age, whether it's they're 5 or 65 or 105, like they are someone that can work if they want to work, then we're going to start orienting things to match that expectation that they have of themselves and that people have around them. And equally important, and maybe more critically, as soon as a person determines that they can't work or can't do a particular thing, and other people start to identify that, then suddenly their lives start to orient in that fashion as well. And we start to see that downward trajectory toward the things that we said, you know, maybe I didn't want those things in my life. And again, this doesn't mean that just because we put something in our vision and we type it on a piece of paper that it automatically comes to fruition. We're going to get to the how in a minute. Right now, we're really just focused on the why. But it's certain that if we use this as a tool to orient the activities of our lives, that we're more likely to get there. Next slide. So as we've said, having a strong vision is critical, but as you would guess, it's only part of the story. So I've identified that I want to work, I want to have friends, I want to eventually move out of my parents' home, maybe I want to go to college, but it begs the question, what resources do I have that will assist me in being able to reach those identified, that vision? And equally important, what are the resources I don't have that I think might be necessary to get there? So we're going to look at the second tool, the second person-centered planning tool that I think is can be used for everybody and anybody for whatever situation you're dealing with. And that is the integrated support star. And some basics to keep in mind about the integrated support star. Again, it's all people need some support to lead their good lives. Okay, now obviously some people need more support than others, different types of support. Maybe you need more support at different periods of your life based on what situation you're in or what kind of things are happening to you, but we all need support. So this isn't just a disability thing. We all use a combination of different types of supports to help us reach our identified goals. And how I like to use this tool personally when working with people or families or teams is to plot out and brainstorm the supports that a person already has and then see where the gaps might be, and using that really as your playbook on, okay, what's the next thing we need to do to help address whatever these gaps are. So it's not that you're just magically filling out the star and, oh, we have everything we need. If it were that easy, right? So historically, people and systems have really focused on that bottom quadrant, the one in green that says eligibility specific supports. So things like DDA funded supports. But we really need to, again, intentionally consider all of the resources that exist for a person. So making sure that we start with always starting with the person first. What are the personal strengths and assets? What kind of relationships does the person have in their lives? What kind of community resources exist for the person? And what kind of technology might be available to assist the person to meet their goals? So really looking at all of those pieces together. Next slide.
So I think that, thank you for taking us through each of the tools. And I think really bringing it back to the why, which is the vision, the good life vision that a person has and a family has for their loved one, and bringing it back to the how, which is the integrated star. And I think by tying those two together, you still have the foundation and the principle for all. And these tools are really accessible for anyone. You can use them regardless if you have a disability or not. And I think the fact that when we look at the trajectory and we're looking upwards, things may change during a certain point of a person's life stage. And that's where it's kind of interesting to utilize the integrated star to constantly reevaluate and make it as current as possible to your current resources and supports. I mean, just as you said before, your vision changed as you grew up. So obviously your star is going to change, the how is going to change because your why changed. And I think by utilizing these tools, it is a great visual to help you reevaluate or define where your strengths are. And where you have challenges or opportunities, really, for higher expectations. So is there one area on the star, though, that is more important than the other areas when we're talking about employment?
Well, next slide, please. And I will talk about that because I personally think that every part of the star is very important. And it's absolutely imperative that we look at all of the parts of this integrated star. But in my opinion, one that can get overlooked as important or one that is underutilized is that of relationships. And that's the one I want to talk about. And I want to talk about why I think it's important, and then, you know, how I think that fits in with specifically with employment. So again, this particular integrated star is filled in with examples. This is not representative of this is what everybody's integrated star needs to look like. Or you might be thinking, you know, if you're thinking about a family member of yours, you're thinking, well, my family member doesn't have all those things. This is purely examples of things that could fall into a person's integrated star. Because like I said, one of the purposes of doing this exercise and really filling this out with a person and speaking with people is identifying where the gaps are. So you might see some pretty big gaps. So again, let's start with some examples of personal strengths and assets, and then we'll talk through the relationship piece. So maybe the person has extensive life experiences from which to make decisions. That's a personal strength, you know, as opposed to someone who maybe hasn't had a lot of life experiences, for whom it may be more difficult to make decisions about what they like and what they don't like. And part of that goes part and parcel with being a youth. That's youth just by nature of their age may not have experienced, we all know this, as somebody my mature age, I've experienced a little bit more, so I can make decisions based on my past experience. And maybe personality traits. People have different personality traits that suit different situations better. Some people are very outgoing and can connect with people really easily. But that doesn't mean that somebody else might not have a different personal strength, like the ability to sit quietly and read really intense things for hours at a time. That might serve them in a different way. So really sifting through what are the strengths that each person has that might benefit them in any way in society. And then thinking about relationships. What relationships does this person have, whether it's family, and you can, you know, if you're doing this with a person, list people's names, you know, Aunt Sally and mom and dad and whoever, who are the neighbors that this person knows really well and that know them, coworkers, community members, church members, acquaintances. I'm gonna say gamer friends. Now I don't play I don't play internet games, but I know full well there's a whole gaming community that people connect with and really make some pretty amazing connections. So I think the other point is we can't determine what kind of relationships are important for another person. That's something that they can identify. And also I put on there social media. This is a way that many people connect to other people. So is that something that this person has been supported to explore? And then again, I already touched a little bit on eligibility specific supports, things like DDA, special education, Medicaid, Division of Rehab Services, anything that you need to be eligible for and apply for. And then we shift over to community resources. So this could be schools or transportation, businesses, churches, civic engagement, being part of something in your community, parks and rec. Again, I put social media on there as well. I mean, this list could go on and on. And then finally, what's the technology that might be needed or the person has access to? I don't have to say it, the obvious, that we're all have become very reliant on remote access to each other, especially during this pandemic. So is that something that a person needs support to have access to so that they can also stay connected with their group of friends and with their coworkers in the same way that we're doing something like this? Okay, so again, thinking specifically about relationships, this star is looking pretty full again, but when you're doing this with someone else, it may not be full, and the relationship there may be just family members, and maybe there's some paid staff. And we could debate whether the paid staff should really be under maybe the eligibility specific supports, but that's maybe a conversation for different focus. But again, we've seen historically that the percentage of ordinary community members as opposed to family members and paid staff in the social network of a person with a disability is historically very small. Okay, so that's why we want to pay special attention to this. The majority of relationships typically and historically have tended to be family members, staff, and maybe other people with disabilities with whom they were also receiving services. So why this is important and why I'm belaboring the point is because that research has consistently shown and connected specific outcomes like health and well-being and employment with the quality of our social networks. So if we ignore that and expect some of these other things that we've envisioned in our lives to come to happen without fully kind of investigating the social aspect and relationship building, then I think we're not going to help somebody get to their full potential.
Right. I think those are all great points. I mean, really, our relationships define how we make connections and how we grow, and it's really important to support that. So how can you support a person to make more social or community connections, and why is it so important, especially with a person with maybe significant support needs? Next slide, please.
Yes. So I'll talk about the why in a minute, but I have a few thoughts on the how. And I think that, again, there's not a play-by-play book about necessarily how to support another person to successfully make relationships. There is some nebulous nature to the people that we're drawn to and the people that we connect with that is, you can't necessarily just order that up in a perfect world. But I do believe there are things we can do to get closer to that. So as we get older and we move away from school, it does become more difficult as adults to make those kind of social, to make friends, to make social connections, because sometimes people kind of get established in their social groups or they have their way of connecting. So we have to, again, be intentional and mindful about what are the ways that another person could expand their network. So start by thinking, where do we typically meet people and make connections? So that's a good place to start, just thinking about places. And for the purpose of this discussion, I'm including the internet as a place because, let's be real, we are making connections over the internet all the time. So just know that that's a place too, not just necessarily a physical place. So that list of where could be limitless, and it's going to, again, be contingent upon what do I like? What am I interested in? I'm it's very likely that I'm never going to, I don't know, hang out at the racetrack, and that, because that's just not, it's just not my thing. But that could be somebody else's thing. So we're going to start with, what are the lists of places a person might meet people that are, a job is a great one. I've met plenty of people in my career. So just going to a place every day where you get paid to be there, you're gonna be with other people. It could be going to school, whether it's college, or you're going to do continuing ed classes at your local community college. It could be going to church. There's very often a community that's very robust in community churches. You could be part of a club of some sort, or you could meet people through acquaintances or friends that you already have. Okay, so that list could go on and on. But here's the critical part, okay? These places that I just mentioned and the activities are typically places that you have the chance to interact with the same people over and over again, okay? So I could choose an activity like going to the movies, and I've certainly gone to the movies. I enjoy it as an activity, but it doesn't necessarily provide the opportunity to see the same people over and over again and to develop a relationship with them. So I think that's the critical piece to think about when supporting a person to expand their social networks. Not that those activities are bad or that people shouldn't do them, but it's not going to give you the same return as thinking about where are the places where I'm going to see the same person multiple times in the same setting, and there's kind of a pattern to it. So, going to the grocery store is probably not going to fit that bill. So the key is developing those relationships, is to spend time in places where other people spend time doing things that we both like to do, and here's the important part, just being together in those spaces, does it provide the opportunity for us to do something and interact in a way repeatedly? And so I'm going to give you an example, okay? A tangible example, just so you understand what I mean. So let's say that there's a youth that you're thinking of in your family or just somebody that you know, and that person really enjoys music. He enjoys listening to music. He likes learning about his favorite musical artists. Maybe he goes online and listens to the artists perform. Maybe he follows some social media of these artists, and that's kind of the extent of how this person is into music. So what if we support this youth to go places where they can listen to music? Maybe it's a concert, or maybe it's more locally. Maybe it's an open mic night at a coffee shop, which is like huge where I live. There's just open mic, not right now, but pre-COVID, there were a lot of open mic nights. And these activities are great, but just going to the coffee shop, just going to the concert doesn't give you much potential to build a connection. You're just gonna listen to the music, you're gonna leave. And these are what we would consider to be more passive type activities, okay? So instead, can we think and explore with this youth, does there exist some opportunity to take a more active role and therefore increase the likelihood of making connections? So again, same example, is there a way for this youth to participate in some way in the open mic night? Whether it's performing, which I know is not for everybody, I would never in a million years do it, but I'm just throwing that out there as an option. Maybe it's assisting the coffee shop with setting up or cleaning up for the open mic. Maybe it's helping to introduce the performers as they come up. Usually there's a set list that gets developed, and you call people's numbers. Maybe it's just to introduce, the youth is going to introduce themselves to the person that's performing, just to say, I really liked your music. Can I follow you on social media? Where can I connect with you? Because that whoever's playing their music, they have an Instagram page, and they've got TikTok, and they've got Facebook, and they've Twitter. They have it ready to give you because they want to connect as well. So thinking about how can we move those passive activities to more active to expand the person's social roles. So again, I don't think, and I'm not implying that the example that I gave works for everybody. It's simply an example to move past more passive activities into more active ways to communicate with other people and to really develop long-term or longer-term relationships. Again, I'm not implying that just because I introduced myself to this guy at open mic night that now I've got an in for my musical career, and that's not how any of this works. But I've expanded a little bit. I've pushed out a little bit. And who's to say if I don't go, maybe I go every week for 6 weeks and people get to know me, and they're looking for somebody to help out with their music set and helping to break down. And there's just another chance to expand my my connections. And so while we're on this slide talking about this subject in particular, the kind of the how do we actually support people to connect? Because I think it's so incredibly critical, and I don't know that we often spend enough time talking through the mechanics of it or giving examples and activities that people can do. We do tend to focus a lot, I think, on more passive things, going places, being places, but just going and being someplace, we're not of the community at that point. We're just passively participating. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. We all do it. It's part of it, but we have to be intentional. So part of the materials that Donna uploaded to today's webinar that are on the side of your screen, we included a publication, and it's called Friends, Connecting People with Disabilities and Community Members. And I cannot, I love this publication. I've used it as a reference for many years, and I think it does a great job of actually walking through some of the mechanics of how to support people with disabilities to make connections. So I'd highly recommend downloading it, and maybe not everything is for you, but I think there's some worthwhile kind of conversation points to have with people, some investigation of what people might like to do. And there is some discussion specifically around employment and how these conversations can lead to employment outcomes. So thank you.
Yeah, I think everything that you just said was especially, and I loved how we really landed on making friends. I mean, think about when you move into a new area and you don't know anybody, how do you even, what are the mechanics of being part of your community, a new community that you've never been introduced to before, you don't know where to start. And yes, those passive activities of going to the movies, and it's great, but then how do you make those connections? So all those examples that you just made, I think really attest to how we start building our relationships, and the focus of building the relationship is making friends, because those connections will open doors and open opportunities for everyone. So all of this person-centered planning and community building, how does this actually help you get a job?
Right, that's the question. Exactly. And I also want to just piggyback on something you just said, because both of us use the word friend multiple times. But I also think there's value in identifying specifically our social or our connections and our relationships, and we may not consider all of those people friends. And I think that's good to remember too. We all have people that we can call to ask a specific question or introduce us to someone. We may not really consider them our friends. I mean, I think the word friend, especially with Facebook, has taken on maybe a different meaning. You know, we're friends. We know them. Right. So, I mean, I think it's okay to not make it, there's no pressure that every person I interact with, oh, I've got to make friends with them. That's not how any of us operate. It tends to happen more organically, again, by spending time with people doing things that we like to do. So I just wanted to say,
yeah, and
I wouldn't want people to come away thinking we're advocating that everywhere you go, you try to make
I think it's about recognizing, being recognizable. So if you go to the same place multiple times, I used to work at a coffee shop, and you start recognizing people, you start making those relationships. They're not necessarily friends or know anything about your personal life, but they know your name, and they know maybe some things that you like. You talk about things that are happening that day, and so it's your acquaintances. You're part of the larger community, and you're recognizable to that person. And I think that's really an important piece, like you just said. It's not necessarily about being friends, but it's about being recognized and remembered. So
yes, and if somebody recognizes you and they know you, even if it's peripherally, and something bad is happening to you, those people are more likely to step in and say, oh, I know Kathleen. Let me find out what's going on over there. So we're helping to build safety for people too, by helping them expand people that know them and feel comfortable interacting, and they know they know you. So it's cool. So how does this help us? How does this help a person get a job? The quick answer to this is anyone that is seeking paid employment, for those people, it tends to be true. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Everybody's heard this expression, and most people that are actively seeking employment know this to be true, because there's typically some period of time where you reach out and you connect with people and you find out, well, where do you work? And what do you like your job? Oh, tell me what's going on at your job. You're not just randomly going, well, hopefully, hopefully you're not. And there's been multiple studies that back this up and that really highlight that anywhere from 70 to 85% of people that get their jobs at a particular company, it's because someone helped them get a job there. And so in other words, it isn't going to a place, filling out an application, submitting it to HR, interviewing for the job. That typically isn't the way that most people get their jobs. And I would also say that if that is how you got your job, I'm not knocking it, that it can happen, but it may not lead to the most lasting outcomes, because you may not have been able to vet the work environment as well. You may not have an inside scoop on kind of the culture that you're getting ready to step into. So there's other benefits for doing that as well. And again, I mentioned this in the beginning, the DDA has done multiple webinars related to what we call customized employment, which is really a process for supporting people. And it doesn't have to be people with just disabilities. Customized employment is really for anybody that's seeking a job. And the simplistic definition of customized employment is really starting with the job seeker, getting to know the person really well, their interests, what they're good at, what they're going to excel at a job, and then getting to know a business and connecting those two together. And so I just want to do a plug. If you want to learn more about the mechanics of that, how do we actually connect people to jobs, then I would recommend that you go to our DDA website, and we have an archived webinar page, and we've got a whole series of webinars that do really a deep dive specifically on those subjects. So I don't want to pretend like that part of this doesn't exist, because I think it's critical. But if you're doing customized employment, and customized employment is going to be really helpful for people that require much more support, because it's, as the name implies, the employment is customized for them at a particular organization or company. And if you're doing that, it's going to be even more successful if you're able to start that process digging into the person and their family's own social network and relationships. Now, again, not every relationship that you have and not every connection you've ever made is going to necessarily lead to a job, or you may not even be interested in that industry. However, I would say, again, I don't want to go get a job at the horse racing at the track. I don't know why that example just came to my mind, but I mean,
you wanted to have horses when you were younger.
Right, exactly. That was like my dream when I was a kid, but now I have no interest in that. So all of those connections may not necessarily lead to employment, but again, it leads to learning about other people's experiences. Well, tell me what you like about your job. It leads to maybe being able to try out a job, because actually I think I am interested in the kind of work that you do. Could I just come by and see what you do and learn more about your job? It could be, again, getting a foot in the door, and every job developer or employment specialist will tell you the same thing, that having that connection to make that phone call as opposed to doing a cold call to an organization or submitting an application is always going to be more preferable. So that's how people get jobs. 100%. That is how most people get jobs. And so if you don't have any relationships to go on, or people that know you, or ways to navigate through that, it's going to make the job search a little bit harder. And I would also say, once a person gets a job, those connections are just as critical. So it's not like, okay, now I got a job, I don't need relationships anymore. Well, of course not. Every person that's ever worked for anywhere knows that as soon as you step into now this new environment, you've got to navigate the social aspect of it as well. You've got to figure out who are the people that I should be getting to know really well, who are the people maybe I shouldn't spend time with, what's the culture here, where do we eat lunch, who's going to tell me the real deal about how things really go here. So that relationship building extends beyond having the job. And what if that job goes away? Do I have other connections other places? So it's all connected. So again, a social network is going to be critically important with helping you get a job, keep a job, and really to expand opportunities, situations. The more people we know, and the more people that know us, the more support we have. So that's the short answer.
Yeah, no, I think that's all great. And then also, I just wanted to say, when you have those recognizable people at your work and you're starting and you may need help, they're more often able to help you or be willing to assist you because you're recognizable to them. And so that's just something that all of our interactions every day are based on relationships, whether big or small. And really how we support those relationships can end up in successful long-term employment. So I just wanted to kind of end with additional resources for employment. Marianne, can you hit 2 slides ahead? We kind of jumped over just the person-centered process. That one, yes, thank you. So we've attached additional resources for employment as well as community mapping included in today's presentation. And the handouts are focused on relationship building, as Staci mentioned before, some of the tools, and charting the life course tools on starting conversations between individuals and their families, and highlighting those community mapping for inclusion and employment. So if you have any questions about that, please feel to reach out to us, but they're going to be also emailed, as Marianne said earlier. So thank you so much for your time.
Kathleen and Staci, I want to thank you. Like, we have a few minutes, so I'd like to take a moment.
Oh, Marianne, I think you're muted.
Muted. Okay. Can you hear me now? Terrific. Yes. Well, thank you both. We have a few minutes. I'd like to take some questions if the audience is interested in submitting them. You can do it through your chat or question box. Again, we would like to entertain questions specific to this webinar. If you have specific questions regarding your services and support, please contact your local regional office. And then again, with regard to Appendix K, you want to submit it here to the dda.toolkitinfo@maryland.gov. So with that, I'm going to ask Erin, have any questions been submitted?
Yes, hi. So first, there were some questions about whether the presentation is being shared. It is in the chat and it'll be emailed afterwards. And along with that, people are asking Staci for the presentation archive you referenced, so maybe we can include that in the email that goes out as well, so folks will have the link for that. There are a number of questions about customized employment. So how do you take somebody's wants and desires, and particularly somebody with really significant disabilities, and translate that into a job, into inclusion, into things? How does job carving work? So if you could talk a little more about that.
Sure. And again, because we have limited time, I would be doing customized employment a major disservice if I tried to cram it into the next 5 minutes. So we'll make sure when Donna sends the email out that she includes a link to our archived webinar page, because there are multiple webinars that will really walk through the customized employment process. It is not a 5-minute conversation, but in general, yes, I can speak to that. And the reason we didn't get into that today is because in my experience, there are some things that can be happening before a person is ready to step into a job. And that is all of these other things, is focusing on having that strong vision and paying attention to relationships and using the integrated STAR. And again, all of these things can be happening at any age, including a child all the way up. But again, the customized employment process is really designed to help match a person up with a work environment that's going to meet their needs. So again, if I just, let's say somebody asks me, Staci, what do you think you want to do for a job? And I don't have any real experience to make that determination. I don't really have any life experience to know particularly what I'm good at or what I'm bad at or what I don't like. Then we revert back to my 13-year-old vision of a good life, where I said, well, I think I want to work on a horse farm. And that's fine, because that might be the first step to figure out, well, let's take Staci to a horse farm and see if she actually even likes it, or if she likes the smell, or she likes the sound, or she likes to be outside, or whatever. Right. I don't like to ride horses. What I do, but so the customized employment process, really the first step of it is getting to know the person. And I don't mean getting to know the person like for 10 years, because that's, I think, where our field, 20 years ago was kind of stuck with, well, let's get to know the person over a really long period of time, and one day we'll help them figure out what they want to do. That's not how any of the rest of us get started in the workforce. We try things and we get connected with the job and we decide, do we like this, do we not like it? And we maybe move on to a couple of other starter jobs. So that is normal and typical, and we should encourage that as well. But again, the customized employment process, we're going to get to know the person, all the likes, the dislikes, the skills, the abilities, the non-negotiables, like there's no way that I'm going to work at night because I'm not a nighttime person, which is true for me. However, my adult children do fine working at night, and if you told them they had to be at work at 7 in the morning, they would say no deal. So how do we get that information about a person to figure out what's going to work? And then once we do that, then there's the employment specialist that's supporting the person should also be doing some work around workplaces. What's an environment in which these non-negotiables are going to fit with that person? Well, if the job means I have to be there at 7 in the morning, I can't do it. I just said I need to work evenings. And then there can be a discussion about, well, you also really said that you wanted to do X, Y, Z, and this is the time that happens. So that's when we as people, not just disability, we have to make critical decisions. Do I really want to do that thing that I wanted to do, or do I want to sleep in and find another job? Those are really important experiences. They're important discussions. And so it's the matching up of those two things. So highly recommend you go watch a couple of our webinars that walk through what customized employment looks like, how employment specialists should be interacting directly with employers about this. So it's not going in and saying, I want you to hire a person with a disability. That's not customized employment. It's very focused on capacity and matching up the skill and ability with the needs of a particular employer. That's really the key to the customized employment. But I think it's worthy of more discussion.
Yeah, thank you. That's an impressive overview in 5 minutes. Topic I know we could talk about for days. One of the things you said was, this works for people with disabilities the same way it works for me. And there's some comments in the chat box about that. People saying, every job I've gotten in my whole career has been through a personal connection. or, so there are a number of comments like that. And I do think it's a great reminder that disability for people, like employment for people with disabilities, it's not different than employment for everyone.
Exactly.
Sort of in closing, there are a couple of comments about, sort of tackling low expectations. And I wonder if any of you want to comment on that before we sort of turn it over and talk about the next webinar in the series.
Yeah, I can start. So I think it's about having higher expectations for yourself. I mean, sometimes maybe something that is in your environment, maybe your family or your already established relationships, maybe they don't have the expectations necessarily, but you have to look within and say, okay, where can I start? What are the things that I like? What are the things that I don't like? And do I have these expectations for myself? But also realizing when maybe you need help to identify those higher expectations and make better relationships or to support them. I think we all can't be an island, right? We can't be secluded by ourselves and have these high expectations. We need these relationships to support the vision that we have for ourselves or even help identify it. So some of the tools that you can use are also attached to the handout. I really enjoy the family perspective on employment outcomes because that is a tool that a person can use when discussing just opening the door for maybe from the family perspective that there are barriers that have been set by just societal expectations, throughout the person's life and just opening that door to start the conversation. I think that is a really helpful tool to utilize because we're talking about the community and inclusion and mapping, and we're not necessarily focused on you're going to get a job tomorrow and this is where we are. It's just about raising the expectation, saying, hey, you know what, I'm not really happy currently where I am and I would like to grow, and let's have a conversation around this, or what resources do I need to support me in that conversation. And I really think that piece of the Charting a Life Course Framework Toolkit helps that framework of the conversation. Staci, do you have anything to add as far as raising expectations?
I just want to add that in my personal experience, I think having low expectations of another person and having them about yourself can be one of the biggest barriers to get over, even more so than a lot of other barriers that we list. Because again, if there's been a determination made, whether it's said out loud, said to the person, something like, well, I don't really think this person can work. That really does set the tone for what the very next day is going to look like for this person. Instead of always leaving the door open to say, if the person wants to work, then in my mind, the door is open for infinity. And every next day presents another opportunity to continue exploring, to continue to build more connections, to try new things. And maybe the person does that their whole life. And if that's the case, you've lost absolutely nothing. You've lost nothing by keeping the door open to that possibility, whereas the opposite can be true. If we make that determination, we say, don't really think that's going to happen. And let's say the person's 21 years old and we've made that determination officially, unofficially. We've essentially closed a door for someone. So I think we owe it to people, and people owe it to themselves to have high expectations that we can all strive for, and we can support one another to keep rising up, whether we reach our goals, whether we get to that horse farm that we wanted or don't, we can keep making steps forward. So I think those high expectations are critical.
We are at the end of our hour, and I really would just like to take this moment to thank Kathleen and Staci once again for your expertise, your energy, your passion, and taking the time to share all of your knowledge with us. And just on a personal note, as a parent of a young woman who is moving towards employment, I just thank you for the work that you do and the path that you are paving and the heavy lift that you're engaged in, and just keep it up. Just keep it up. And then I'd also like to thank Erin for her assistance, and Donna and Janet Furman for all the work to support us in bringing this webinar to. I'm having difficulty with the progression here. Here we go. I also would like to thank Deputy Secretary Bernie Simon for the opportunity to host this webinar for families. And with that, I thank you for joining us, and I hope that you enjoyed this webinar, and you'll join us for our next webinar, which is on July 22nd. So normally they're bi-weekly. We are going to be skipping a week, and we won't be back until the 22nd. And that will be on building partnerships between providers and families. Cindy Kaufman from SEEK will be our special guest. With that, I hope you remain well and enjoy your day. Bye-bye. Thank you.